Good morning. How's everybody doing today? It is Thursday, last day of the lecture week for us. I am Dr. Chris Roddenberry coming to you from my home office here on South Campus at Wake Tech. How's everybody doing today? If you're online, go ahead and check in now in the chat bar and tell me how you're doing. Don't forget it is Thursday, so your discussion boards are due tonight at 11:59. I want to thank everybody who came to the webinar last night. I really enjoyed myself, and I hope you enjoyed yourself too. Let's see, what in the world did we talk? Oh, we talked about IQ testing last night. I've already forgotten. Holy cow. Good morning, Heavenly. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Fantastic. Looks like we have a couple of people here online. We're going to be talking about chapter 10 today. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Got ahead of myself. We're going to be talking about emotions today. Yesterday we talked about motivation. Today we're going to talk about emotions. So that's the crux of today's lecture. Okay, fantastic. It's good to see everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk a little bit about emotions. Emotions. Now, here's the deal. It's really hard to exactly describe, define, talk about what an emotion is. So we're going to go ahead and give you a working definition. And I've looked up, I've went to several different specialists. I've gone to different areas, and everybody has a slightly different explanation for what an emotion is. But let's say that an emotion is a biological state. It's characterized by neurological changes that happen in the brain, and it leads to characteristic patterns of feelings, thoughts, and it even drives our behavior. Okay, so think about emotions as a biological state characterized by changes in your brain that leads you to think a certain way, feel a certain way, and act a certain way. Okay, now, just like motivations, emotions are what cause us to be different from, and in my opinion, better than computers. All right. By the way, good morning, Julia. Thank you for coming today. I love your sun logo. Fantastic. We're just talking about emotions today. So we've got this working definition of emotion. Why exactly do humans have emotions? Remember we said that motivations, yesterday when we were talking about motivations cause us to initiate and sustain behaviors in different directions. What's the value of having emotions? Well, emotions provide us an evaluative interpretation of the environment, okay? So I can see this, I know that I like this, I know that I don't like this. It sort of allows you to evaluate what's happening in your environment and what it means to you. So emotions provide an evaluative content, okay? They also provide us a way to evaluate our own behavior. Have you ever done something that you're really proud of? That emotion, pride, causes you to want to do that behavior again. On the other hand, have you ever done something that you're embarrassed about or that you feel guilty about? That emotion of guilt causes you not to engage in that particular behavior before. So emotions provide evaluations. They allow us to evaluate how our environment is making us feel, and they also allow us to evaluate and redirect or change our behavior. They also, emotional displays showing emotions allow us to facilitate social interaction. So for example, if I drop your favorite coffee mug or your laptop and I start laughing and go, ha, 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 I broke your stuff, that emotion is not going to facilitate a good interaction on our part. On the other hand, if I drop something of yours or break something of yours and I give you the sad, guilty face, hopefully that makes you feel better about my violation of your space, of your property, or whatnot. So emotional displays actually allow us to facilitate social interaction among people. So emotions are very, very important. They allow us to evaluate how our environment is making us feel. They allow us to evaluate our own behavior, and they also smooth over our social interactions. I'd like to stop for a minute and say good morning to Louis Tapia. Thanks for coming in this morning. It was good to see you and actually all three of you in webinar last night. Although we don't want to feel sad, these emotions that we have do provide us with very important values and qualities, and they allow us to adjust our behavior so we interact more effectively with our fellow human being. Now, how exactly should we classify emotions? If we were going to start defining emotions, exactly what are the characteristics that we could use to build a model of emotion on? Now, I'm going to talk to you briefly about two different models, sort of ideas of what emotions are. The first is the circumplex model, suggested by a fellow named James Russell, right down here below me. You'll see this circular model right here. What he argues is you can think of, if you wanted to define all emotions and come up with a model that explains them, you ought to think about two underlying dimensions that he said are part and parcel of every emotion. Number one, each emotion has a certain level of arousal. Some emotions bring us up. Some emotions bring our arousal level down. Okay, so he said, think about that one dimension. On the other hand, we can think about emotions as having having sort of a valence, if you will, either a positivity or a negativity. Some emotions are happy emotions, some emotions are sad emotions. And what he argues is if you take these two dimensions and write them out like this, you can go around this circle and place every emotion that human beings experienced as being some combination of arousal and valence. So, for example, if you're elated or super duper happy, that emotion's going to have some level of arousal. It's going to bring you up, and it's also positive. On the other hand, if you're angry, that's also an arousing emotion. I'm up, but I am negative that way. So you can think about happy and upset as being two emotions that contain lots of arousal, but one is positive arousal and one is sort of negative, angry arousal. And then you can compare that with other emotions. For example, sadness. That's sort of a bring me down, low arousal type emotion that also has some negativity to it. And we can compare that with the person that's just ate a great meal and is contented, right? So it's sort of positive, but it's also low in arousal. And he says that you can take all of our emotions and sort of draw them as being created by two things, either our level of arousal or our level of positivity. How psychology helps us to control, how does psychology help us to control emotions? You know, that's a great question, Juliet. Actually, I don't think psychology necessarily lets you control your emotions. It helps you to understand your emotions. Actually, I guess to control your emotions. The idea is you want to remain positive and aroused. But learning about our emotions will hopefully allow you to be more aware of them and respond to them. I don't think we can really change or get rid of emotions, Marcella. What we can do is we can use them to either behave adaptively in healthy ways or use them to act in non-healthy ways. Have you ever seen somebody whose emotions kind of affect them negatively and make them less productive, less happy, less liked? So one of the things that we really want to do, especially when and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, Juliet, when we're raising children, what we want to learn how to do is to teach our children how to control their emotions in more positive ways. I don't think you can get rid of emotions, but you can learn to harness them for your own good, right? So the circumplex model suggests that we think of emotions as just this combination of these two qualities, valence and energy. Now, here's this cool study that we're going to talk about today is this fellow named Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman is actually an expert on emotions. More importantly, he's an expert on deception. He's an expert on deception. Oh. Right. You can think of moods. I hear that methods like neurofeedback that help people with depression. That is a way or is different. Yes, although I want to characterize depression and it's a little bit different. Emotions are more short-lived, Juliet. They come and they go, whereas depression settles in and doesn't go away for a while. So I hear what you're saying, but let's say that depression, yes, it does involve a mood, but it's a little bit different than mood, and that moods sort of are transient. They go and they come and they go. We can use neurofeedback. Actually, you can use meditation. You can use cognitive behavioral therapy. In fact, one of the things that makes you a successful human being is learning how to evaluate and respond effectively to the emotions that you have. Great question, though, Marcella. Thank you very much. I really like the questions that you're asking. Okay. Now let's compare that with this fellow named Paul Ekman, who is a master of evaluating deceptive behavior. What this guy Paul Ekman did a long time ago is he took pictures of people from America around the world with different emotions, and he carried those around the world. And what he found was that no matter where you go, a smile is a smile. No matter where you go, a frown is a frown. And then he would have people from other countries, he would tell them to characterize an emotion on their faces, and he found that Americans could read their emotions as well. And so what he found was that there were 6 basic emotions, okay, actually 7. Your book's going to talk about 6, even though he's got 7. Your book's going to talk about what we would call primary emotions. Paul Ekman had a really crazy theory. He thought that these primary emotions were built in, they were neurologically determined, and they were universal. Just like we all have reflexes, just like we all have language, just like we all have attachment processes as infants. He argued that we can think of human beings as having 7 basic emotions that can be observed all over the world. So look at these emotions. What do you see in my face right now? What emotion did I just show you? Can you tell me? Notice how the face is turned down, the eyes are squinched, and the eyebrows are knitted. And you see this wrinkle on my forehead? I'm demonstrating to you anger. On the other hand, what is this emotion? Right? That emotion is fear. Grumpy. Okay, good enough. Lewis, that's great. And then you see this one. Notice how the eyes are wide open, right? And then that's fear, because you see my face is not showing happiness. But you know what? If you change it and put a little happiness in your mouth while you do the big eyes, then you have surprise, okay? And so what he argued is that you can look and see 7 primary emotions that are easily observable all over the world. So anger, fear, sadness, disgust, happiness, surprise, and contentment. And so what he suggests, instead of thinking about these dimensions of arousal and valence, think of 7 different categories of emotions that we can create using eyes, eyebrows, cheeks, lips, and nose. And he argued that these universal emotions can be seen everywhere. Now, one of the things that Paul Ekman notes is that you can also think about there's more than 7 emotions, but these other emotions are blends of primary emotions. So nervousness is a little bit of fear, a little bit of fear, and a little bit of surprise, okay? You can think of relaxed as being a little bit of contentment and a little bit of happiness. So, what he argues is that more complex emotions like embarrassment, shyness, these things are not universal. And more importantly, research has suggested that there are culture specific rules that determine when certain emotions can or cannot be demonstrated. So every culture has happiness, every culture has anger, and when a person decides to show these emotions, it is universal. But what happens is there are rules about when we can show emotions. So, for example, in some cultures, if your boss is yelling at you, you can show unhappiness. In another culture, it may not be appropriate to show unhappiness while your boss is yelling at you. So, Paul Ekman says that there are 7 universal emotions that are made the same with everybody's faces all over the world. However, there are rules about when a particular person from a culture can show that emotion. And we're going to come back and talk about Paul Ekman a little bit more in just a second. Now, the psychology of emotions is hundreds of years old. I take that back. Well, let's see, from the 1850s, 1950s, not quite 200 years old. But the research into what emotions are and how they relate to the body is one of the oldest areas of interest in the fields of psychology. Now, you folks remember me talking about William James. He wrote the first psychology textbook. We talked about that in chapter 1, the father of American psychology. He argued, he had this idea that if you think about it, emotion is a physiological response. Okay, something happens to your body, and also something happens to your mind. So when I'm sad, my body changes and looks a certain way, and I have a certain physiological response. But at the same time, I also have sad thoughts that go in my mind. So this guy, William James, understood that emotions carry sort of this physiological component as well as this cognitive or mentalistic component. All right. Now, here's the question. Which comes first? Does your body get scared and that cause your mind to become scared? Or does your mind become scared and cause changes in your body? Which is it first? Do we have the physiological reaction that causes the label? Or do we have the label that causes the physiological reaction? This guy, William James, thought that what happens when we have emotions is that our body changes, we have a physiological response, and that our brain interprets that and creates the emotion. So according to William James, the reason we're scared is because our heart starts beating fast. So he argued that you see the bear, this causes your heart to start beating fast, and your brain then interprets that physiological response and comes to an emotional conclusion. Our mind causes reactions. Wow, good job, good job, Juliet. And I like your opinion, and I think you may be right. But just know that you disagree with William James. Now, here's the finding that sort of supports him. What they find is that if you have people read comics, okay, humorous comics, and you have them make a happy face, they will think of the comics as being funnier than if they have a sad face. So you see this facial feedback experiment here. They had people read comics. Half of the people read the comics with a pencil between their teeth. See this? This is a smile. And what happens is people that read the comics, when their face is smiling, they think of the comics as being funny. On the other hand, he had some of the people read the comics with the pencil right here. And this is a not so happy face. And what he found was that people who read the comics with this face found them funnier than people who read the comics with this face. And so what this model suggests is that why we have emotions is because we interpret the physiological changes in our brain. And you'll see the little picture over here that's in your textbook. You see the threatening grizzly bear. It causes your heart rate to start speeding, which then causes you to experience the final emotion of fear. You say, my heart must be beating, therefore I am afraid. Now, we're going to contrast that with a theory by Walter Cannon. Walter Cannon is the guy that first coined the term fight or flight. So he was the first guy that really understood the biology of the fear response. And here's what he suggested. He said, you know what? It's not the body causing the mind, and it's not the mind causing the body. What he argued is that when we see the bear, our heart rate, our physiological responses change, but at the same time those things change, our mind is changing. So he argued that we have the cognitive component as well as the physiological component at the same time. So what causes us to have emotions? Do we interpret our body and come to a cognitive label? Or do we have a cognitive label which causes our body to change? Well, the James Long theory says that our body has these reactions and this causes our mind to experience the emotion. But the Cannon-Bard theory says that those two things happen at the same time, right? But both of them argue that emotions include a physiological component as well as a cognitive label, if you will. Now, I'm going to contrast those two guys with a really cool theory from the 20th century. It's done by a fellow named Stanley Schachter in the 1960s. Now, he argued that what these two theories over here, the Cannon-Bard and the James Ling theory, suggest is they assume that there is an inborn, innate genetic link between your physiological arousal and the cognitive label that you experience. However, Schachter came upon this really interesting insight. If you think about it, the physiological experience of anger is similar to the physiological response for elation when you're super duper happy. In both situations, your heart's going to beat fast, your face may flush, right? And your breathing speeds up. If you think about it, the physiological response of anger and excitement are quite similar. What this guy Schachter argued is that human beings actually use social cues to interpret the physiological experiences that they have to decide what emotions they are. So if you've ever had a little baby before and that little baby gets hurt, if you've ever had a little baby and the baby falls over, the little baby will hurt himself and they'll feel the pain and they'll look up and look at you. And if you go, "Oh, are you okay?" the baby will cry as if they're afraid. On the other hand, if you start laughing as if what the baby did was funny, sometimes instead of crying, the baby will start laughing. So you can see that little infants, sometimes they take their social cues from the adult around them to decide, I just fell over and my head feels funny. Am I scared or am I happy? According to Stanley Schachter, emotions work the same way. He argued that lots of different emotions have the same physiological response. What human beings do is we look at our social situation and we try to interpret what emotion we are feeling. Okay? Now, and what he shows is he brings people into his lab. He did this study in the 60s. You can't really do it now because it involves giving people epinephrine or adrenaline pills. And I think this would be hard to get by an IRB board. But what he would do is he would bring patients into the laboratory and he would give them adrenaline pills. And he would say, hey, we're getting ready to do an experiment. Would you please take this medication? Now, he'd give them the medication. Now, he would tell half of those people what he gave them. Hey, look, this is an adrenaline pill. You're going to feel that your skin's going to flush, your heart rate's going to increase, and you're going to feel some arousal. He told some of the people. Some of the other people, he didn't tell them what they were going to feel. He didn't tell them that they had taken an adrenaline pill. So these people did not know that this pill was going to affect their physiological experience. He then puts these people into a room and he says, if you would, please wait for me. We're going to begin the experiment in about 15 minutes. Now, in the room where the people are sitting, there's a model who happens to be working for the experimenter. The person doesn't know this, but this person has been instructed to act either very happy or very angry. Okay? Now, for the people who were told that their body was going to have this reaction, and then after 15 minutes, he has the person rate their mood. How happy are you? How angry are you? Now, what he found, for the people he told that they were taking adrenaline and that their body was going to change, these people's opinion of whether or not they were happy or angry didn't change in either condition. So they were not affected by the presence of the person in the laboratory, okay? I know that my heart's going to start beating fast and I'm going to get flushed because the doctor told me I'm taking this medicine. So if you ask me if I'm happy or I'm sad, I'm neither. I'm just under the influence of this medication. However, for the people he did not tell some of the people what he was giving them. So these people had an emotional reaction, had a physiological reaction that they weren't prepared for. And what he found was the people who were sitting in the room with the happy model, when he asked them what emotion they were feeling, these people said, I'm feeling happy. They interpreted their body's arousal as happiness. For the people who were in the room with the angry model, what he found was when he asked those people what emotion they were experiencing, those people had no explanation for their level of arousal, so they looked to their social situation and they said, you know what? I must be angry as well. So, 3 classic theories of emotion that talk about how emotions arise. Does our body change and automatically cause an emotion to come out? Are they innately tied and our body causes the emotion? That's what James Long says. On the other hand, James Cannon-Bard says, yes, these 2 things, physiological response and cognitive label, are tied, but they both come up at the same time. Stanley Schachter, on the other hand, said, you know what? Arousal and label and cognition are separated. We have this arousal, and then we can have any one of a number of different emotions based upon the environment that we find ourselves in. All right? But the one thing I do want you to appreciate, is that for the entire time we've been studying emotions, people realize that emotions are composed of a physiological response, okay, that's directed by your amygdala and your hypothalamus and your emotional glands, your adrenal glands. There's this physiological response. And then there are also these thoughts, this cognition that relates to emotions. Now, if you'll look at the picture over here, what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about the physiology of emotions. Now, emotions do have an evolutionary value. Basically, an emotion allows you to decouple your behavior from reflexes or simple learning. I can have an emotion about teaching, and that can direct my behavior. I can have an emotion about this person or that person, and that can direct my behavior. And so emotions allow us to become more sophisticated animals. Our behavior becomes more sophisticated. Now, how did this evolutionary process develop? If you look over here, you notice that we have an amygdala, our thalamus, and our cortex. What I want you to know is that emotions have 2 pathways. They have a fast pathway that's innate, that's inborn, that infants have. And then there's a slow pathway that develops as your brain myelinates, as long as you are trained by your parents to have good emotions, okay? So we have two paths to our emotion. Let's say, and let me give you an example. Let's say you walk into a room and your friend, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, somebody is hiding in the closet, and they jump out of the closet and yell, "Boo!" Okay? Now, that sensory experience is going to come through your thalamus, and that person jumping out of the closet and screaming at you is going to cause your thalamus to send information two ways. The first is to the amygdala, and the second is to the frontal lobe, the cerebral cortex. Now, the fast path, your amygdala, provides you an instantaneous emotional response that is very evolutionarily adaptive in its value. If something scares you, your initial reaction is to run away, to have that fight or flight response. Okay? That's what we would call the fast path to emotion. And if you walk into a room and somebody jumps out of the closet, the first thing you may do is scream in absolute terror. That's your fast emotional response. However, the thalamus also sends that information to your frontal lobe, where it takes a little bit longer to process that threat and fully evaluate what that threat means. So somebody jumps out of a closet and scares you. Your thalamus immediately tells your amygdala, something's scaring me. And your amygdala creates a quick reaction. However, your frontal lobe then looks at that person that jumped out of the closet, said, "Oh hell, that's my brother Ted," or "That's my cousin whoever," or "That's my best friend playing a joke on me." Your cortex then thinks about this and says, what is the appropriate emotion here? Actually, the appropriate emotion is not fear, but laughter. And so what happens is immediately after you jump and scream, your body's emotion will change and you will start laughing. Exactly. If you work in an environment where people scream and are aggressive, that can affect your feelings. Right, because you learn to interpret and respond to these emotional responses with your frontal lobe. Juliet, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, right? But think about it. If anybody's ever scared you, you'll notice that you have two emotions quickly. The first one is terror, and the second one is laughter when you figure out you've had a joke pulled on you. In a sense, that represents the thalamus and the amygdala and the cortex working together. The amygdala creates that quick, basic emotional response like anger or happiness, and then your cortex changes that emotion based upon careful evaluation of the situation. Okay, so your frontal lobes actually fine tunes your emotional state. Now, one of the things that I will tell you, research has shown that our frontal lobe is responsible for our emotions, right? But that our right frontal lobe is responsible for our negative emotions. So when you're thinking, "I'd like to kill this person, I'm so freaking angry," your right frontal lobe is going to cause you to approach that person with a desire to be hostile towards them. On the other hand, research and PET scans have shown that when you have a happy emotion, the left side of your frontal lobe is more active. So your frontal lobe causes you to approach the object, but your right frontal lobe is approaching it in anger. Your left frontal lobe is approaching it in happiness. But the bottom line is that you have these two pathways. The amygdala, remember that brain center that we talked about, is activated by the thalamus. When something comes into your environment, the thalamus causes the amygdala to have a quick emotional response. However, the thalamus sends that same information to your frontal lobe, which allows you to evaluate it and maybe change your emotional response if that is appropriate. Now, why is that important? How many of you know babies cry a lot? Little kids cry a lot. You ever notice that 2- and 3-year-olds will cry at anything? But have you ever noticed that when you get older, like me, like you, we don't cry very much? We do occasionally, but we don't cry very much. Why does crying go away? Why do 2-year-olds throw such temper tantrums? Why do babies cry so easily? It's because the second pathway, the slow pathway to emotion, has not been myelinated and fully developed. So your infant is going to experience the fast path of emotion, which is going to have these simple positive and negative emotions, okay? And the secondary pathway isn't quite working yet. And so as your child becomes 4, 5, 6, and 7, and that frontal lobe begins to myelinate, your child will begin to develop the ability to control their emotions. A 9-month-old baby can't stop crying unless the thing that makes it afraid goes away. The child can't calm themselves and stop their own crying with their frontal lobe. It's not possible. That is an ability that develops as you get a little bit older. And so our emotions, now, why is this important? Because some people, when they grow up, don't develop this ability to moderate their emotional responses with their frontal lobe. Have any of you ever been around a person who has no emotional control, who, quote, flies off the handle, who has a bad temper? If you're around a person with a bad temper, a person who yells and screams, a person with no emotional control, what you have is a person that hasn't learned how to moderate their emotion with this secondary, slow path to emotion. Right? Now, if you'll look at this picture over here, this is the famous picture of Phineas Gage's skull. He was the guy who first demonstrated the value of the frontal lobe in emotion and personality. He was a railroad worker in the 1900s. There was an explosion and an iron bar was sent up through his face, just like you see the picture right here. This iron bar went up through his cheek, came out, went right through his orbital bone here, and came all the way out through the top of his head. This 3-foot bar that's a 1/2 inch thick, just like a bullet, went up through his face and destroyed Phineas Gage's frontal lobe. The crazy thing is it didn't kill Phineas Gage, and in fact, he was able to walk, talk, run, do everything that normal people can do. The only thing that changed about Phineas Gage is he lost the ability to control his emotions. And so that provided psychologists from the 19th century the idea that maybe the frontal lobe is responsible for controlling our emotions. So as it suggests here, damage to the prefrontal cortex may impair people's ability to experience complex emotional responses. And in fact, what we're going to find, I talked about it with Kluver-Bussier syndrome a couple of chapters back. Damage to the amygdala actually makes it difficult for you to read other people's emotions, right? So if you're looking at me right now and I go, you can tell that I'm extremely happy. It's Thursday, yay. If your amygdala was destroyed, you'd have trouble reading my emotional response. You wouldn't be able to tell if I was happy or sad. If you have damage to the frontal lobe, you may be able to read my emotions, but you won't be able to control your own emotions. So, the physiology of emotions that we've learned here in the 20th century has borne out this idea that human beings' emotional responses include cognitive labels and physiological responses. And you can think of it as, in terms of the physiological response occurs fast, and the cognitive response occurs a little bit slower, which is why William James thought that the physiological response caused the cognitive response. They're occurring at the same time. It's just one works a little bit quicker than the other. Okay? Now, here's the deal. Let me switch over to here. You can and should help your child learn how to control their emotions. As I suggest here, emotions are a combination of a physiological response and a cognitive label. The physiological response is quick and is controlled by your amygdala, and the cognitive label is a little bit slower and is controlled by your frontal lobe, right? Now, just like we talked about critical periods in neuroplasticity, if you want your child to develop this ability, you need to work with it. You need to energize and activate this particular response as your child is growing up. So all children at the age of 6 months or a year cannot control their emotions. However, you as a parent can and should help them learn how to control their emotions as they get a little older. If you don't, what you wind up doing is raising an adult that can't control their emotions. All right? So, how do you and me as human beings learn how to control our own emotions? How does a successful adult do it? Well, we have three major sort of strategies. The first is we reappraise things. I might look at your behavior, and the first thing you do is insulting, and my amygdala fires off, and I start to get angry. But then my frontal lobe says, wait a minute, Chris, think about it. This person just had a family member die. This person just had a bad event, a divorce, or maybe, you know what, it doesn't matter. This person is not important to me. In a sense, what I do is I reappraise the event and change the emotional content of that event, right? So if you've ever been around an infant or a young child and you have to leave an event and the child doesn't want to leave the park, your baby may start crying. What you have to do is help them reappraise that event. So let's say we've gone to the park, my kids played on the swings and whatnot. It's time to go. We've been there an hour. My kid starts crying because his natural emotional response is, I'm unhappy, we're leaving the park. You as a parent need to say to the child, hey, don't worry, we're coming back to the park tomorrow. We can come back to the park tomorrow. We can come back to the park later today. What you're helping your child do is reappraise this event and say, you know what? This is not such a bad thing, right? Juliet says she works with a kid with ADHD and very hard for her to control her emotions. Absolutely. And one of the things that you're going to see with people with ADD is it's related to frontal lobe functioning, Juliet. And this is why your child's going to have trouble probably reading emotions and controlling their own emotions. It all relates to this link between the frontal lobe and the amygdala. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great thing to add into the discussion. Now, not only do we learn how to reappraise our events so that they help us keep from getting angry, we can also use humor. Okay, tell your child a funny joke, make them laugh, tickle them. And that maybe changes their emotional content. Or sometimes what we do is we distract our children. Your kid says, I'm crying because I don't want to leave the park. Yes, but we're going to get ice cream. Suddenly the kid is distracted by ice cream and they don't think about the thing that's making them sad. So in a sense, what you want to teach your child to do is how to use reappraisal, humor, and distraction to moderate their own negative emotional responses. And Julia, you may be trying to do some of that with your autistic patient who has trouble controlling her emotions. You may, when she starts to get angry, you may try to explain to her why she should be angry. You're using reappraisal. You may do something funny and make them laugh or tell them a joke. You're using humor to help change that child's emotional functioning. Or you may show the child something it likes or try to redirect them to a different activity where they're not as angry. you might be using distraction. But in a sense, Juliet, what you are attempting to do is you are attempting to help your child. You are coaching your child and helping them to learn how to control their emotion. So, if we all want to raise children with good emotional control, we need to engage in what we call emotional coaching. Emotional coaching. What you have to do is you have to teach your child how to identify emotions and how to work through emotions. Oh, you must be sad. You must be scared. And help your child by labeling emotions. Children, human beings, don't necessarily know what emotion they are feeling. You have to help them learn how to spot and identify these emotions so they can learn how to adjust these emotional responses. Some people, especially in the South, where I'm from, the Southern United States, especially for guys, like I'm a guy, when I started having emotions as a kid, the common thing to do in my culture was to tell you, quit your crying. You better stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Oh, you shouldn't be angry. Stop acting like that. Put a smile on your face. What my upbringing was my parents were emotionally dismissing. They didn't teach me how to experience and deal with my emotions. Instead, in my culture, it was common to tell me not to have an emotion. And what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of adult males, Southern males, who don't know how to respond to any emotion except through anger and violence. So maybe you hurt this adult male's feeling and he feels very ashamed or embarrassed. You know what he's going to do? He's going to go straight to anger because that's the only emotion that child was taught to use. That child is sad because somebody has done something. They didn't get a job that they were supposed to get. Instead of experiencing that sadness, that person may interpret their emotional response as anger and get angry about it. So just like these two classic theorists talked about the idea that there's physiological arousal and a cognitive label, you have to learn as an adult how to identify and experience and label these emotions properly. Juliet says it in Colombia, it is the same. Okay, right. You're supposed to learn how to control your emotions. We don't want to not have emotions. You have the freaking hardware in your brain to have emotions. Instead, you need to learn how to identify and then adjust your emotions. Not have them, but to identify and adjust them. Juliet, you said you are from Colombia. Have we talked about that before? Where in Colombia are you from, Juliet? You know, I spent a month living in Medellin, Colombia this past spring, and it was absolutely the most awesome month that I have ever spent. I absolutely love Colombia and hope to be going back for a month in the next few months. Oh, okay, I did tell you my story. Sorry, I only have so many good stories, so I have to tell them a bunch of times. Okay, so we're on the same page that Colombia rocks, right? Now, quickly. I probably should have changed my slides around. Oh, Cuqueta, Colombia, the border city with Venezuela. Okay, all right, and I'm sure you mentioned that to me too, Juliet. I'm sorry. Okay, so 7 facial expressions that have universal meaning, independent of culture. Display rules are the rules that are learned through socialization that dictate when and how emotions are displayed, and these are culturally determined. And then secondary emotions are just blends of primary emotions that may vary in expression from culture to culture. Now, the point that I want you to get from Paul Ekman is Paul Ekman was he's an expert in identifying liars, and basically what happens is our emotions tend to mirror what we're feeling inside. And so sometimes when people lie, they are trying to tell you that they're feeling something that they are not feeling. So if I'm lying to you, and I know I'm lying to you, on the inside, I feel guilty and ashamed and embarrassed because I'm lying to you. But since I'm lying to you, I'm trying to keep that emotion in so you can't tell I feel embarrassed. What this guy, Paul Ekman, discovered, was that people's emotions leak out when they're trying to lie. People can't help it. And he identified these small leakages as micro expressions. So one of the things that you're going to see is when people are telling you the truth, their body is going to mimic what they really feel. So if you ask me, Chris, do you like Colombia? I'll say, yes, I like Colombia. Notice how my nonverbal follows my words. Yes, I like Colombia. On the other hand, you might say, Chris, did you steal that candy bar? I might say, no. Did you see that? I shook my head up and down. So I said no, but my body told the truth about me. Chris, do you like teaching at school? I love teaching at school, right? See that? My body is lying. And what this guy, Paul Ekman, found is that not only do we sometimes engage in just obvious nonverbals that tell on us, but sometimes what you'll see are quick emotions. So Juliet may walk up and I really don't like her, but I don't want her to know that. So I'm going to pretend to smile. Juliet walks up, I see her, and then I quickly frown and then change it to a voluntary smile. What's happened is I've had a micro emotion that's actually leaked out. It is definitely a great country. So what I want you to get from today's lecture, emotions, they are very important. They have evolutionary value. They allow us to evaluate our environment. They allow us to communicate and build social relations with other people. Emotions have a quick component, a physiological component that's directed by the amygdala, our emotional center, but they also have a cognitive component, which is the way we think about the events that occur to us. And full emotional responding involves engaging the frontal lobe as well as the amygdala. And if you want to raise a healthy child that is able to function effectively in the modern world, you have to train them. You have to help them develop their emotions by engaging in emotional coaching. Okay, you know what? That's all I had to say today about Chapter 10. We're going to be talking about motivation and emotion, or excuse me, not motivation. We're going to be talking about stress next week. But that's all I had to say for today. Does anybody have any comments? Anybody have anything to say before I let you go? Don't forget, do the discussion board that's due tonight at 11:59. We don't have an exam this week, but we do have homework that's due tomorrow, Friday, at 11:59 p.m. All right. Cool, folks. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend. Bye.